So testing, 1, 2, 3. That's a pretty lame lead-in, isn't it? I should be saying welcome to spring. But the first day of the new season today. Look, I can only hope I've got some metrics up on the screen there. I'm just checking. My focus seems to be it is sharp. I'm not recording at 60 frames a second, so anyone here who wants to do frame inspection of my video footage, probably. This isn't really the video for that. I've got others. If you want to inspect what FluidMotionFrames is doing, or various things, either record at 60 frames a second or some such. This here is more of a proofing or a tech assistance video, I would argue. And if you don't need tech assistance, let's just talk about theory, I guess you could say, PC troubleshooting and the requirements of modern, or certainly open world games. But modern games and open world games can have a lot in common. Open world games traditionally, for the last 20 or so years, have been the hardest games to render. And even if a machine doesn't net benefits from faster RAM, the few titles that have shown that faster RAM speed, or sorting out your PC's subsystems and other systems, more than just the GPU and more than just the CPU, games that require streaming in high value assets in an open world, and they've got to have a system in place where they can stream in and out simultaneously, they can burden machines down in ways that other games don't. So it happens. I mean, it happens all the time. It happened on Kingdom Come Deliverance on the console. And the reason I do this video is having spent a little bit of time in the forums looking at what people are actually saying regarding the game. A lot of people put the blame on everyone else, and I can't help but think back to a few years ago where I'd hang out in the Kingdom Come forums on launch. Love the game. A lot of people complained about issues, and especially on the PlayStation. They were having a lot of issues, and it was really obvious, specific to their PlayStation, right? Hardware that doesn't vary on anyone is the PlayStation. And specific to some people, they were having huge issues. And it was like, well, okay, you've installed the game, and you've told us that you've installed 8 updates. And the game's had 8 updates that significantly alter the files that are already on your drive. And it's not like you bought your PlayStation 4 yesterday. You've had it for 3 years, and you've installed tons of 50 gig games and deleted to install 70 gig games, and your drive's really, really, really fragmented. And you've come and installed this really large game, and then you've run 6 or 7 patches that alter those files and might make them a bit bigger and expand them out across your drive. And then you go to play a game with streaming assets and have massive frame rate woes and low quality graphics that other people aren't claiming. And a lot of the gamers would take the attitude of, well, it's a console, I don't have to do anything to maintain it. It's the developer's issue to sort out. So running off the logic that a lot of people are really picking on this game, I've just come in to try to make it work. Now, like, if I were to make it work poorly, right, it's running at a fairly low frame rate already. So what happens if I cast Lumos? Oh, that's not it. Oh, I don't think I can do a Lumos. It should be one of those buttons. The Switch controller doesn't work too well. Oh no, different save game. There we go. Okay, so not like I need to cast a light spell over grass. That's just a guaranteed surefire way to make your machine work poorly. Now, that being said, I've tweaked this game. It shouldn't drop below 60 on the frame rate. And that is based on frame doubling technology. So I'm tweaking my game for 30 frames low, right? I do not accept 1 iota of a frame below 30. That's just unacceptable. Can't do it. But if I stay above 30 on the frame rate low and then just take whatever free frames I can get in the frame rate high, it's pretty good. Now, this area of the game, a little bit hard to render. And what we will notice is when my frame rate is really low, a few times where I can generate a frame generation issue, where there's the incorrect graphics on the screen, like just for a half frame, is when my frame rate gets down low. So it's important, for the point of benchmarking and testing right now, you've got to know some areas in the game that are notoriously hard to work, and then you go in and you tweak those zones. And so I actually spent a little bit of time last night looking at my 1% lows. I didn't care about my upper frame rate. I got more than I need in the top frame rate, but I needed to sort out those frame rate lows. And when you get into the grassy embankments south of Hogwarts, someone like me is an idiot and just runs all the settings at ultra. PC tech. For me, this is a benchmark. I get to see the game looking pretty. Look, please excuse me. I'm just going to cut down in front of the camera. I realise my partner's left the bedroom lights on, some fairy lights, and they reflect on the screen. So let me just get rid of them. Something I've never really done before, so I'm just letting the equipment. There we go. Ah, brilliant. Okay, so looks to me like my screen is working. Everything's solid. So look, I'm using a Nintendo Switch Pro controller on the PC. I was using a mouse. I found that a mouse or a trackball, gaming at 30 frames a second with no latency on the controller, was perfect. Now, I don't use the scaling technologies for the resolution because I found that the latency they added in terms of the generation time to use that tech slowed the game down enough that 60 frames a second doing that didn't feel as nice as 30 frames a second brute force with no latencies. Now that being said, right now I'm using frame doubling technology, and that's got typically a 16 millisecond delay. 15 is usually what it sits on when I'm flying around the map and enjoying. But in moments like this where I just find an area in the game that I can't really run, I'm at 10% below or 20% below the speed I really wish to be in, my frame gen lag does dip down. It sits on that 20 millisecond mark. But when it's at 16 or less, at 60 frames a second gaming, that means that next frame is ready in time for rendering to the screen, and it doesn't feel like any latency. It actually feels really zippy quick. And the difference of this frame doubling has allowed me to now start playing this game with all the settings maxed. And sorry, more importantly, enjoying it on a wireless controller, which before the latency of a wireless controller was like, oh man, dunno, it's a bit rough. So I didn't do it. Now, let's see if I can get this going. It's a pretty amazing game. So let's talk, so for anyone who stuck out my video, thank you. Chances are you're not even getting to the title screen of this game, or it's crashing instantly. When I look at the threads currently on the internet, those threads are pretty consistent and constant. And it might just be the game's gone on sale recently, so anyone that was waiting to get it is now looking at getting it. And I mean, it is such an impressive title. As tech demos go, I don't think I've got anything on my PC that could touch this. For just absolute quality of what an open world game streaming in does. But look, as someone that's run it pretty well since day one, not had any issues, not had any hiccups, not had any streaming issues. About a week ago I started getting some streaming issues. And you wouldn't believe it, turned out my page file, the drive my page file was on, was full. Now the drive my page file was on is actually a lot faster than the drive I have this game on. I have it on an ancient Samsung 850 EVO. Now they're a budget drive, which means they use the CPU for decompression of data. Now in all the benchmarks, the EVO versus the Pro doesn't look any better or worse. But those benchmarks are done at a system level where you're doing desktop productivity and the CPU has power to burn. When you're gaming and you've got a game that wants to use 6 or 8 threads, okay, I had 2 little hiccups there, but they were, that's all good. Yeah, so right. So Samsung EVO, and I took the attitude, the reason I put the game on that was I thought, okay, I wonder if that's going to affect my frame rate if my CPU's bogged out. But this game, and what a lot of people aren't understanding, and they get really upset, going, oh, I've got tons of RAM, I've got a really fast drive, and I've got constant jank as the game loads data in and out of RAM, VRAM. And I'm just going to run around Hogsmeade because it's a pretty hard test, brute force, and especially because it's loading in 2 gig modules constantly. Right, so I don't usually get that frame rate low. It's going to sit there and let it bounce back. That's usually when it's loading in a next module, and normally the metrics down the bottom, I put the GPU memory up. It's actually running just off the screen, the GPU memory utilization, and I can actually watch it dropping 2 gig out of RAM and loading another 2 gig in. And that's when I get these little janks, and that's actually what I was going to address in this video, is that once I sorted out my paging file, all those janks went away. Now, yeah, I've got 32 gig of fast RAM, I've got a fast NVMe, but the game doesn't use them. Why? Because the game works on lowest common denominator equipment, such as an Xbox Series S, which has a strong multi-core CPU. Okay, this is one of the worst runs I've ever had. So, not sure what's going on here. Ran fairly flawlessly this morning. I guess there's a lot of lighting going on. It's mist, it's night. Like, this is a worst case scenario. I am running at 1600 res because the grass on this hill looks way better. I'm not using any of the scaling technologies. nothing. They destroy the grass. They destroy the fidelity, left, right and centre. I'd rather have a lower frame rate and a better looking image constantly, as long as the frame rate's good enough for suspension of disbelief. Generally is. As I say, I've never seen these numbers so bad. But if I could run through the corridor here and maintain my frame rate so that my turning is smooth, which I basically can, it's playable. It's not my favourite, but I mean it's playable. And for a lot of people, they would consider this not janky. For me, this is the jankiest I've ever played it. But being able to run down those stairs smoothly requires the frame rate to stay above 30, essentially. And any massive frame rate variations will affect the turn speed of my controller, so it's generally the sorts of stuff I'm testing for. But sorry, if I was working off a script and staying focused, I guess this would be a better video. Right, so yeah, a lot of people complain about the streaming systems and whatnot, and I kind of believe that the game should be using their hardware and their equipment, but the reality is, because of the Xbox, the base model, which gets all the next-gen games, it has to be able to, you know, it has to stream data in and out, so it's got the solid-state drive, and it kind of sets the low bar for, you can use your CPU to decompress, you can do all this stuff, and so streaming systems have to be built around the Xbox, or consoles, and so we find this with Star Wars Outlaws. It seems to want to use 16 gig of VRAM, and even on systems with only 10 gig VRAM cards, there's no frame rate reductions because of low VRAM, right? And that's because the streaming systems are aware that they need to keep a 10 gig card fully loaded with the data needed to render the game world in any given section of the game. So we have to trust the developers to know what they're building for, why they're building it that way, and to tweak the game accordingly, and to set aspects of the game to render across a wide range of hardware. So whenever games are multi-platform, they're not going to squeeze to the metal, is the old saying. So again, I'm just running here to a really hard to render area. Right, the sporty guy had this benched. I didn't drop below 60, which is my need, but I guess what we've got now is a weird time of day for lighting. We've got the mist. It's a little bit harder to render. So you will see my character double up beside them, maybe, if I'm not hitting 60 here. No, I seem to be just holding 60. So as I say, I've tweaked this machine to be 30 on the lows and 60. I think I cap it at 80, so my video card just starts relaxing after it's drawing the 40 frames I've locked it to with the frame doubling. And it's a really fun experience. I've been a high refresh rate gamer a lot in my life, but when you come across a game that, if the frame rate highs and the frame rate lows are so far apart, the speeding up and slowing down gets quite distracting. So sometimes you're just better off turning all the eye candy up. Once you know what your frame rate lows are, tuning so that they don't go any lower, and then just loading the graphics up to look really pretty. Yeah, well, in a game like this, which benefits from a nice look, I say do that. Anyway, look, we haven't put any solutions in place. So let's talk. Let's talk what's going on and why. A lot of people will get to the menu and it will drop out. Okay, the game by default runs the menus at like 600 frames a second, right? So you need to be able to put a frame cap or a lock on. You can do that through your display drivers. You can set upper and lower limits for games, but sometimes if the game hasn't been run before, you can't do it in the game until you get to the settings menu, and this game crashes for a lot of people before it gets to the settings menu. Or it's not finished building itself, and it doesn't therefore get to the settings menu. So look, the first trick I learned was I had to set a frame rate lock. There were several ways to do that. One of the easiest ways is just hit your volume up and down buttons, and it'll draw a volume slider on the screen. It'll drop the game out of windowed mode. It'll put it in desktop composition mode. It'll lock the frame rate to 60. Take it out of HDR and whatever else, but it's irrelevant. When you're trying to get the game started, and you're trying to stop your video card from overheating, because the game will quite happily run it flat out, which might lead to a drop to desktop, because on the menu it runs a whole bunch of advanced shader effects, and I would have my card on the hotspot, which you'll see up on the screen, they're sitting at 102 at the moment, 100. Usually the hotspot's about 30 degrees hotter than the core, and manufacturers by default never put the hotspot metrics up on the screen, because most consumers get a bit timid of them. So I put them up, because that's what I'm tuning for. I've got to keep those numbers. At 110, the speed of my card will not be doing what it says. Right now it says it's doing 2500 megahertz. But if I hit 110, it'll still say I'm doing 2500 megahertz, but it will not run as quick. So I need to keep it below 110. But at 115, my machine will just hard reboot. Now that's specific to my rig. You need to know your rig. Every card has an upper thermal area, You need to work with that. Now, for me, because I needed the game to brute force certain frame rate lows, and I could get them by overclocking my card, I opt to run the fans on my card a lot louder than any other game. And I do, I brute force and I hit those frame rates I need. And so, yeah, okay, these are all worst case scenarios, I totally agree. Like, if anyone's looking at this going right now, I wouldn't want to play that. It's like, well, okay, I could drop the resolution 1 setting, and I could just sustain 80 and 60 easily, everywhere. But I don't, because the stitch work and the material properties in this game and the lighting and the ray tracing, especially on high res with high temporal resolution, is divine. It really takes on a new... Oh, keep messing there. It just, altogether, very impressive. There's a lot less visual noise, a lot less contrasty edges. And I just found with the ray tracing on really nice high resolution settings really comes into its own. And it's a very impressive title because of that. Anyway, back to the thread. So people are getting to the menu and it's dropping to desktop, crashing back to Windows, for example, the game front end, probably Steam. We need to get on top of that. We need to see what's going on. So it's either your temperatures are going to be going right up, or there's quite likely an issue there. The other issue we need to deal with on startup is any time you have a hardware change, which includes any time you install new graphics drivers, which is generally the first thing you do when you have issues troubleshooting a game, the game, for whatever reason, does a double shader pass. Now, it doesn't generate the shaders quickly. And I think it's because it also does it in the background in the game, and they've learnt that if you're going to do that, you don't want to tax the CPU. So they kind of do things at a really slow rate, as if they're trying to hide it from we, the user. But they do that off screen, and then they do it on screen. So they do it twice, the first time you fire up the game. And the off-screen one is, it's either a black screen, and it hasn't started generating the green bar, saying generating shaders. But the music usually kicks in at somewhere at that point. And if you look at your CPU graphs, you'll see that your CPU is just flat out. Like, I've got a 6-core, 12-threaded beastie, and it just sits there, all cores just maxed. It takes, I don't know, half a minute or a minute or something. And then I get the second green bar. It's the exact same process, I believe. But the first time you run the game, you've got to let it get through both of those processes. And most gamers won't have the patience, because no other game takes that long. And any time you hear music but the screen's black, you kind of think, oh, my game just crashed out, right? So we all kind of end up going, oh, look, it's not working. And then we cause more issues for ourselves by hitting Alt F4 or going to the task manager and going, okay, well, shut that down, it didn't work, I'll try again. At which point the game goes, oh, I didn't successfully start up last time, I better be in a safe or compatible mode, I better rebuild my stuff from scratch thoroughly and comprehensively, and it takes even longer, right? So the real trick with getting this game started for that first time, so you can get to the menus and change the settings that work for you, maybe turning VSync on and stopping it from your card from overheating and crashing back to desktop. You just need to get in there, and you just need to have the patience to let it run. Now, the chances are, on those screens, your machine will crash if your card's getting too hot, so you need to put your frame rate limit in place to sort that out. If you're having stutter issues when travelling around the map, you might need to sort out your streaming systems. As I say, I put this game on a really crappy SSD, and I wasn't having any issues until my page file ran out of space. And the ancient trick with page files that we've been doing since 20 odd years now is you set the minimum size and the maximum size to be the exact same size, probably like 12 gig or 16 gig or something. And that way Windows doesn't recreate it on the fly. You just lop off a serious chunk of your drive, nice and clean, contiguous, like a nice linear space that the drive can read on the burst quite quickly. And ideally you put your page file on a drive that doesn't have the game on it, or ideally not your system disk. But if your system disk is your fastest drive on the machine and your game drive's a large one that's not as performant, put your page file on your system drive. And it'll just aid the game. It'll make the text, it'll make everything come in quicker. The higher res assets will come in quicker. A lot of people who have drops during cutscenes are people who are suffering texture streaming issues, right? And so the cutscenes, for me, when I first played the game, I set everything to 4K Ultra, and the cutscenes would happily drop down to like 6 frames a second. Now, my cutscenes, I think they might drop into low teens. They generally hold good upper 20s. They're not perfect, but I don't mind, because all the materials on the clothing, all the facial expressions, the ray trace shadows rolling over their cheeks, everything just looks so good. I don't mind if my cutscenes aren't perfect. But look, this gameplay does feel really good. So this game is a win for FluidMotionFrames2. FluidMotionFrames2 uses intelligent vectors to predict where the new frame has to create objects on the screen, and it reduces majority of frame composition issues that might stand out or be jarring. Right? And the only way I can make it reveal a poor pixel when doing frame gen is if my frame rate lows drop below 30 on the 1% lows. But that's not entirely true anymore because, well, I think that is. It used to be I needed 60 on the frame rate lows, which essentially meant it was 30 but then doubled up. But the latest version, as of a day or so ago, in the beta branches, reveals that FluidMotionFrames2 will drop the frame gen frames if there's a major fast drawing swing. So I'm going to do a 180, a 360 degree turn, but it's going to be really hard. Lots of forest around me, lots of grass. I'm going to pan the camera quickly. Right, so that frame gen low is now 39, 36, but that'll be raw frames. Whereas in the past, that would have been doubled frames. Sorry, that's confusing. That's hard for me to look at. Because my actual FPS dropped below 60, there was, as you can see, doubling of my character across the frame. But you kind of got to be looking for it. I can play the game for hours. I don't notice it. I'm pretty sensitive to graphical issues. And I've got to say, for whatever graphical issues it introduces, all the graphical issues it fixes, because I'm now running at double the frame rate, is incredible. So usually when you go into a room, the ray tracing first pass doesn't have the correct light values in place, and quite often it can wash surfaces with a full white value. And it can be quite jarring. The persistence at 30 frames a second is on the screen so long that your eyes will look directly at the pure bright white patch. But at 60 frames a second, the update is so quick that generally that white flicker that might happen is just about gone. And once you tune all your streaming systems to be a bit quicker, and once you get your video card running where it needs to be on the lows, you'll actually find that none of those issues come into play. But it's an amazing game. Like, to say that it's pretty hard to render a game like this. Open world game, just beautiful. But if people in the forums are saying, I've got no problems running it, it's your rig, yeah, a little from column A, a little from column B. A couple of Windows settings are less than kind to computers. If we know how to troubleshoot, we're generally going to be all right. I suggest learn how to get your metrics up on the screen, because when you go to the internet to get assistance from people, being able to furnish them with information saying, oh yeah, my GPU power shoots up and then the game shuts down. Or, my hotspot temperature shoots up 30 degrees, like a split second, like tons of ray tracing titles and the menus just drop back to desktop because your core temperature says 70 and you're sitting there going, oh yeah, my GPU's running cool. But then if you go into advanced metrics and turn on the hotspot temp, which is, it's not any specific spot on your die, it's a combination of the worst measured points across all the measurement points. And that's the one you've got to stay on top of. So look, don't be afraid to learn how to use your metrics. Get them up on the screen. I set some quick keys. For me, it's Control Shift and question mark. The defaults on AMD is Control Shift O to bring it up. But I make a question mark. So it's what my head thinks. Oh, I want to make an inquiry about how things are running. Look, it is a really pretty game. It can run really well. It does have some niggles. And if people aren't giving you a fair time because they're saying, oh, my crappy old laptop runs it flawlessly, your experience is just you, right? It probably isn't. And just, be prepared to be a little bit humble when you come in to ask people for assistance, because most people on the net, they're giving it assistance for free, right? They might not be the most qualified. The good IT people are probably running a business or they're doing some other form of income in their life and they don't really have the time to go around servicing people. But I've just noticed that a lot of people are putting out a lot of complaints. I'm not an authority on the internet, but when I surmised a list of what all the errors were, they basically fell into 3 camps. They were generally all things that users can get on top of, but it generally requires an attitudinal change of, oh, okay, it's not necessarily the game, it might require me to tweak my settings. And as an example, I've got a factory overclock video card. The default settings on all the ray tracing titles will drop back to desktop. If I knock 30 megahertz off my GPU, all of those titles work. So, learn your rig. A difference of 30 megahertz on my GPU adds 30 watts of power to my upper headroom drawer and quite a fair bit of temperature sometimes. So unless the game absolutely benefits from that last iota of power in order to brute force a frame rate low that just gets your frame sync, VSync working smoothly, it might be worth it. I haven't had to do it in a long time, but I just noticed with the partner last night, we found some worst case areas in the game and I'm like, oh, I just need 10% more frame rate on those minimums. And then I proceeded to spend a little while sorting that out. And it actually turned out my lowest CPU overclock, 300 megahertz, 350 megahertz slower than any of my other overclocks, which are all mild. They're all undervolting my CPU. I'm not overclocking it anywhere near as quick as it can go. But I actually found my slowest GPU overclock, which must have run with different RAM timings, is significantly faster on the 1% lows. And significantly, to the point where it was like, oh wow, the frame rate lows have gone up nearly 10 frames a second. So, like many things, you probably want to have a benchmark suite. And sometimes when you overclock something, just because it says those numbers are working, you kind of got to run a benchmark and see if it translates to real changes. For example, if you make the numbers on your card 10% quicker, and then you benchmark, and the card benchmarks 1% slower, right? You're probably having overheating issues or power issues or something, right? So for quite a few years now, the best way to overclock AMD cards has been to undervolt them. Find out where they're happy running at a low voltage, and then take them whatever speed you can get for free. And then when you finally hit that wall, figuring out whether it's worth bumping a little bit more voltage into it to sustain a faster speed, or if you just prefer to run it cool. If you're running it cool, you can generally run your RAM up, or if you've got power to burn, you could do other things with it. I myself like to run my fan speed at 1400 RPM, have a totally silent card, totally silent machine, and just game, and just enjoy it, and really get immersed in the game world. And that's really the point of this video. I want to wish the same for you. Look, if you found any value in this video, please, by all means, just leave a comment specifically redressing the game, be it Star Wars Outlaws or Black Myth Wukong or whatever it is that you're doing, and just mention what issues you're having and where, and I'll give it my best shot. As a PC tech since the early 90s, that's my first business. I've been overclocking computers since the 90s, right? The good old Celeron 300A, the PS2 bus, that you put your mouse into, you could make it run at more than 80 hertz and make your mouse more respondent. Like, we used to overclock everything back then. It was fun. And look, I come from that world. I'm not a fan of unstable computing. I am a fan of power-efficient computing. I normally run my GPU at 220 watts of power. As I say, I'm being a little bit hard on this game because I just want it to be pretty, and it really is the nicest tech demo I think I generally see on a PC. So look, if you want some assistance getting your machine to work beautifully, I'd be really happy to work with you and make that happen. Now this is a 10-year-old PC. My CPU doesn't have a lot of grunt. If I put my video card in an external enclosure and paired it with one of the new portable computers, things like the Asus ROG, the Lenovo Legion, Go, ANAO, I think make the Flip and a few things, and they all have a really good chipset in them by CPU standards, because it'll meet the needs of all games, certainly at high-res gaming like 4K, where the CPU is a little bit less dependent on your maximum frame rate. Well, it still is, but your GPU is going to hold you back your maximum frame rate at 4K, so you're not bottlenecked always by your CPU. But yeah, I think with an external enclosure, a lot of those portables, if you want to use them at home and hook them up to your TV and get ultimate graphics out of them, people would be able to render a game looking just like this, because those portable CPUs are pretty amazing. They would, in many ways, equal what I've got here. They would probably have faster subsystems in them, faster RAM, faster drives. I mean, you've got to remember I'm on, first ever DDR4 modules at 2133 megahertz, etc., etc. This is a 10-year-old PC, right? So PCI Express version is old and ancient. The NVMe drives, back then, old and ancient, So this is nothing special, right? There is better rigs out there, and there is easy ways to make them work really well. So making one of those little portables run a game like this, the latest beta drivers actually allow the additional AMD GPU. If you were running an external enclosure, you could actually have both GPUs running, and you can run the FluidMotionFrames on the inbuilt GPU, and it's set to drop, or you can set the quality levels, but you can set it to just like, oh yeah, don't wait for the lower powered GPU to keep up with the big one. Like just forget rendering that frame if that's what you've got to do. You can set your latencies and whatnot. You can really tweak it to within an inch of the life. But there's going to be people out there right now that are running a game like this on Hogwarts on like handheld hardware. Yeah, plugged into the wall, sure. But small portable computers, yeah, you still need to give it a good GPU. But there is just so much fun that can be had in the PC ecosystem, and it really is to the tweaking and what can you do. That's the hobby, right? So if you enjoy PC gaming as a hobby, I'd like to hear from you. Alright, well I'm going to say top of the day with you. I hope your woes in any games are actually small. I hope you just stumbled across this video because you like to see footage of beautiful games like this and you don't really have any issues at all. That'd be fantastic. But look, in case that isn't the case, or if that isn't the truth and you do need some assistance, drop me a line, leave a comment, and let's do a video redressing that. We'll bring it up, we'll investigate it, we'll see which other users are having it, what their solutions were, and I'll discuss the relevancy of other people's findings, because there's a lot of noise on the internet. Sometimes it's hard to sift through that information. But I'd be more than happy to help. So clearly you can see I'm passionate about this game. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's just a joy just to see it running, and I'd like to make sure others could do that too. Okay, well this has been a long exit for no reason whatsoever, so I'm going to say well wishes with. You have a great day.